He was initially detained. Was he placed into handcuffs?
Yes.
Why was he placed into handcuffs?
That's just for officer safety. He was advised that he was being detained on reasonable suspicion. We had a fraud case in front of us.
Sitting in the back of your car all this time. Okay.
Yes.
So not.
No, he was not free to go. He was detained.
What looks like a routine fraud investigation slowly unravels into a legal gray zone that pushes the limits of police authority. Because sometimes, what feels like a short hold in theory becomes something very different in reality.
State call Zachary McFadden.
Could you raise your right hand for me, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you can lower your hand, and if you'll state your name for the record.
Officer Zach McFadden.
All right, state, you may proceed.
Officer McFadden, were you on duty on March 7th, 2025?
Yes.
What area were you assigned to?
The south side, South Patrol.
On the south side, were you dispatched to any calls?
Yes.
The courtroom is silent as the officer takes the stand, calmly describing what appears to be a standard fraud investigation. A bank alert, a suspicious check, and a rapidly developing call-out set the entire situation in motion. On paper, it sounds routine, almost procedural. But as the testimony unfolds, the question starts forming in the background. How routine is it when someone ends up in custody for hours without a clear endpoint?
Where were you dispatched on March 7th, 2025?
To the Wells Fargo Bank off of South Zarzamora.
Okay, prior to arriving to the Wells Fargo on South Zarzamora, did you have any indication what you were being dispatched for?
Yeah, the caller called dispatch indicating that a Hispanic male wearing a reflective vest of some sort was trying to pass a check and that their fraud systems caught the check and they needed police to arrive there.
The officer describes how dispatch identified a suspect linked to a fraudulent transaction. Acting quickly, he intercepts someone matching that description. A decision is made to detain the individual before confirming the full situation, leading some to view the precaution as an escalation.
And began questioning him.
Okay, so on this call, you stated that you had a partner. Were you all in the same patrol unit?
No, two different patrol vehicles.
Okay, who was the handling officer on this case?
I was.
So as the handling officer, were you the officer tasked with investigating the call?
Yes.
Okay, and how did you investigate this call?
First, the suspect we read his Miranda rights. He was advised that he was being detained on reasonable suspicion. We had a fraud case in front of us. I went and talked to the caller, which was the employee at the bank, who stated that their fraud system picked up a possible fraudulent check. Then once we determined the details from the caller, eventually I was able to get in touch with the owner of the check.
What may seem like a simple mistake in a fast-paced environment can have lasting consequences. When someone is restrained, the focus shifts from the investigation to their freedom, leading to a sharp divide in public perception.
Okay, so you stated the suspect was Mirandized. Did you Mirandize the suspect when y'all initially detained him?
No, when he was initially detained, it was my partner that Mirandized him.
Where were you when he was Mirandized?
I was inside the bank talking to the caller, I believe.
Okay. At that point during your investigation, was Mr. Perez under arrest to your knowledge?
No.
Why?
At that point, we were still gathering evidence, still piecing together this case. It took quite a while to piece it together. So at that point, he was just being detained while we were investigating a crime. At the point that we had probable cause to make an arrest, he was under arrest.
Perez, the central figure, is described as calm and cooperative, yet he finds himself handcuffed in a patrol vehicle. While not formally arrested, he cannot leave, highlighting the confusing nature of being restrained without an official arrest.
He was initially detained. Was he placed into handcuffs?
Yes.
Why was he placed into handcuffs?
That's just for officer safety and for the safety of anyone that we're dealing with. In law enforcement as a whole, but especially on the South Side, we deal with a lot of violent crime, a lot of firearms, a lot of weapons. So we found that both in trial and error and just in a general system of law enforcement, that anytime we leave people out of cuffs, there's a lot of opportunity to use weapons or to assault police. And when that happens, usually to get them into custody causes
What should have been a short investigative stop stretches into something far longer than expected. Minutes turn into hours, and uncertainty replaces clarity. Perez remains confined in the vehicle while officers continue building their case piece by piece. And as time passes, the central concern grows louder. When does a temporary detention stop feeling temporary?
Pausing states exhibit at 22 minutes and 6 seconds. At this time, Officer McFadden, was Mr. Perez under arrest?
No.
No. At this time, to your knowledge, was he already Mirandized?
Yes.
Who Mirandized him?
Officer Chavez.
At this time, did you coerce Mr. Perez to talk to you?
No.
Did you threaten Mr. Perez to talk to you?
No.
Did you promise Mr. Perez anything in exchange to talk with you?
No.
Was Mr. Perez speaking with you voluntarily?
Yes.
At any time, did you tell Mr. Perez he didn't have to talk to you?
I don't recall. I don't remember.
Officer McFadden describes the investigation process as careful, involving detailed verification and bank contact to confirm if a crime occurred. Meanwhile, Perez is physically restrained throughout, not free to leave or relax, highlighting the tension between the ongoing investigation and his prolonged restraint.
At any point with your interaction with him, did you Mirandize him yourself?
Yes, I believe I was watching body camera footage earlier today and I realized I Mirandized him a second time.
Okay.
After I Mirandized him as well as Officer Chavez later.
Why did you Mirandize him?
The length of this call, it was several hours while we were trying to find a detective to handle this case. I like to dot my I's and cross my T's, so to speak. Also, once I felt that we had enough evidence on the table to move towards an arrest, I believe that's about the time frame where I Mirandized him again.
The justification focuses on safety and procedure due to potential risks in the area. The officer claims early handcuffing is to prevent unpredictable escalation. However, the situation was controlled, with no aggression or resistance, leading to a challenging question. When does precaution become overreach?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
You mentioned that you do some things in terms of guns and keeping people in cuffs, especially in the South Side for safety in general. But in particular, there was nothing aggravating about this call that would necessarily require.
No, it's more of the area. I've worked that area pretty often, the Zarzamora and Southwest Military.
As the timeline extends, even those watching the case begin to react strongly. Hours pass with no clear resolution, and what was meant to be a brief stop evolves into prolonged restraint. Perez remains in the back of the patrol unit, still waiting for a decision that keeps shifting further away. And with every added hour, the situation feels less like standard procedure and more like something stretched beyond normal expectation.
It comes to that Wells Fargo, they regularly have a off-duty police officer stationed over there just because of the prevalent violence and then gun-related activity in the area.
Was there one there that day?
I don't remember.
Mr. Perez, whenever you made contact with him, was actually very cooperative, right?
Yeah, Mr. Perez was cooperative, was nice, was by all accounts didn't give us any problems or was disrespectful or anything like that.
The defense focuses on how long the confinement lasted, highlighting the lack of basic comfort and urgency. They argue that the prolonged detention raises questions about the reasonableness of the holding method, regardless of the investigation taking place.
So after Officer Chavez Mirandized, he handed him to you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, just because I was handling, we switched handcuffs so that Officer Chavez could get back in service, and then I placed him in my vehicle. Yes, sir.
The officer claims progress was being made, with statements checked and witnesses contacted, but critics highlight a disconnect. While administrative steps continued, Perez's situation remained unchanged, highlighting a gap between process and impact.
He was in your car for like over 3 hours.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was uncomfortable. And yeah, I wasn't happy about it either. But yes, he was in there for at least multiple hours. I don't know the exact time.
Maybe almost 4 hours.
It's possible. It was a long time. I think if you watch the video footage, watch it go from daylight to night.
At one stage, there is acknowledgement that another path existed, releasing Perez and continuing the investigation without prolonged detention. That option, however, was not taken. Instead, the decision leaned toward maintaining custody until clarity was achieved, and that choice becomes one of the most debated aspects of the entire encounter.
It just kept
He was
going.
sitting in the back of your car all this time and can't go.
Yes.
So not.
No, he was not free to go. He was detained.
And so basically, you just you would talk to him for a bit, and leave, and come back. So it was basically like a 3-hour interrogation session, right?
For the however many hours it was. He was being questioned after he was read Miranda rights, and so he also advised us both times that he understood his rights, which were read to him. And so, yes.
Legally, the situation turns on whether Perez's statements were truly voluntary. He was read his Miranda rights, acknowledged them, and agreed to speak. But legal consent is not just about initial agreement. It also depends on conditions over time. And that's where the complexity deepens, because prolonged restraint can shift how voluntary participation is perceived.
At any time, did you allow Mr. Perez out of the car?
Yeah, I believe that we exited the car. I know for sure at least once, because we switched him from a single pair of handcuffs to double handcuffs to give him a greater comfort, a little bit more motion in the shoulders. And I also allowed him the use of his personal cell phone to call work.
The defense challenges the environment itself, arguing that sustained confinement changes the nature of any conversation that follows. In their view, this was not a neutral setting, but a controlled situation where freedom of choice was limited by circumstance. And that raises a broader legal concern whether context can quietly influence what appears to be voluntary speech.
And at what point did you determine that a crime had been committed sufficient to place Mr. Perez under arrest?
Multiple conflicting statements from the suspect as far as the nature of how he got the check, what the check was for, his relationship to the writer of the check or the owner of the check, the nature of his work, the location that all of this occurred on. There was a lot of conflicting statements that were made by the suspect while I interviewed him.
At the heart of the debate is a simple but powerful question. Was Perez speaking because he chose to, or because remaining silent in that situation felt impossible? The answer isn't obvious, and that uncertainty is what gives the case its weight.
The nail in the coffin, so to speak, was the owner of the check telling me that the numbers on the check numbers at the top, were from quite a long time ago. They were like hundreds of checks off from his current checks being used.
The judge focuses closely on the timeline, recognizing that every minute matters in determining legality. The exact moment of warning, the start of questioning, and the duration of confinement all become critical data points. Because in cases like this, time is not just background detail, it is evidence itself.
Right. So, from the court's reviewing of our parties stipulating that Mr. Perez was Mirandized before he gave any statements?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And do parties both stipulate that the Miranda warnings that were given were the appropriate Miranda warnings?
Words.
Okay.
Instead of ruling immediately, the judge takes additional time to review all available footage in full context. That decision signals the seriousness of the matter, where surface testimony is not enough to reach a conclusion. Everything depends on how the full sequence of events aligns when viewed without interruption.
Your Honor, we would just ask that because he was Mirandized, he agreed to speak, that you find that it is voluntary. He was let out of the vehicle twice during this interaction, and as testimony heard, was that the investigation was progressing. It was just slower. They were during the gap period, and although he wasn't offered water, reasonable accommodations were made for him, such as allowing him out of the vehicle to call work. They allowed him to be double cuffed, which was at 18:14 and 18:12 and 12 seconds. And Officer McFadden did check in on him multiple times throughout the time and tried to keep him apprised of what he was doing, such as he's waiting on the detective, trying to get in contact with the proper people. So we would ask that you deny defense's motion.
When the ruling is delivered, the court finds that despite being in custody, Perez's statements were ultimately voluntary under the law. There is no finding of threats, coercion, or improper pressure strong enough to invalidate the statements. And legally, that means the evidence remains admissible.
I don't think that this was a reasonable amount of time to have somebody pre-arrest detainment. It's kept in the back of the car for at least 3 hours before he was actually put under arrest. There was no safety concerns, there was no other reason for him to be held in cuffs under those conditions. He was not offered water, he was not given anything to accommodate him. I understand there's issues in that part of town, but there's nothing extenuating about this particular case with this particular client. For that reason, I asked you to provide a statement.
However, the outcome of the trial itself takes a very different direction. Even with the statements included, the jury ultimately does not find the evidence strong enough to convict. And that contrast highlights an important reality. Admissibility does not guarantee a conclusion. This case exposes a divide that often goes unnoticed. One part of the justice system decides what evidence is allowed, while another decides what it actually proves. And even when procedures are followed and rulings are made, the final outcome can still shift in an entirely different direction. So, the question that lingers isn't just legal, it's perception. When restraint, time, and procedure collide, where exactly is the line between protection and overreach?